game state setup, map select, console logo, play, title setup, and file select. So these are all the overlays in the game. There's a beautiful simplicity to seeing while the game is running, update the graph. And then everything that happens within the game is actually happening in there. Type name. Okay. Take a look at this. Type name, pound underscore init. Type name, pound underscore destroy. Type name underscore init. Type name underscore destroy. This is so fascinating. And this music is really fitting. All right. Welcome back. It is a Tuesday morning. Got my coffee right here. Got a spiced vanilla soul. It's pretty good. We are here today to continue our master quest, which is looking at the source code of The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. What are we doing, man? Oh, there's a lot here. I remember the last episode being a journey. It took a while to get my sea legs, you know, to just start seeing the patterns and seeing how this program runs. I've actually been thinking about it a lot since the last episode, which was maybe a week or two ago. That's how programming works. That's how a lot of these sort of abstract systems make sense in the brain, is you need time. And so starting these, well, from what I gathered last time, when we start main, we set off a few threads. One of them is the fault manager. One of them is, I forget. There's probably more, but so there's the fault manager, but there's also the main game loop graph thread entry. And yeah, I just started to peel that layer when I just had to take a step back. So I fully intend to make sense of that graph thread entry and see what the code is that actually starts that. Is it the opening? The naming here is tricky. Let me get the music going. How's the Spirit Temple? Okay, yeah, let's do that. Okay, let's go to graph thread entry. Graph thread entry, of course, is what we found to be really the entry point of the game. Apparently, it's the graphic thread execution, but this also controls things like setting the game state, things like initializing stuff, and actually getting the game to really run, really. All right, so yeah, while the game is running, update the graph. What does updating the graph do? Game state update. Graphics context. Aha, see, game state main, which is just a generic function, which probably exists in Z opening. Yeah. So title setup init. We set the game state's main to this scene. I forget the terms they use. But yeah, so title setup main gets set to, where was it? This main that exists in the state, which then gets called here in game state update, which is called from graph update, which is called, yes, from graph update, come on, which is called, as long as the game state is running, in graph thread entry. So yes, this is the entry point for all of the main logic. This is essentially the game loop. It's not necessarily specifically for the graphics, though graphics and the gameplay are obviously pretty closely tied together. What does this say? Graphics Shito? Something. Alright, well, this is graphics something. Oh, is this their translate function? Yeah, okay. So they have a translate function. One side is Japanese, one side is the English. That's funny. T-Macro holds translations in English for original debug strings written in Japanese. Match original, they're only direct translations. Any original name is left as is, rather than being replaced with the name in the code base. Okay, sure. Okay. My back and forward buttons aren't working. That's very annoying. Graphics context. Alright. Let's just refresh from the beginning here. We've got main. Main does a bunch of stuff. I don't need to dive into this. Debug, yes. Initialize some registers. We get some message queues. Message queue stuff. Check the stack. Add a client. I'm curious as to what a client is. I'm not going to dig too deeply. Is there a comment here? No. Audio manager, initialize that. Create threads. Okay, how many threads do we have? Where does this get called? Oh, this gets called a lot. Boot main. There's another area where this... Boot crop. Boot proc, where are you called? Okay, not sure about that. Could be a Nintendo 64 thing for all I know. OS initialize? Yeah, that sounds about right. Creates an idle thread. Alright. So, graph thread entry really is the entry point. And this has to be like the reset logic, right? Yeah, main C looks like it's been reset. Yeah, and then it sets reset, which is saying, hey, we're resetting and get the new time, I guess. Yeah, not sure why we would want to break out of this loop. Because once we do, we're cleaning everything up and we're destroying everything, so... Interesting. I have to assume that this loop continues to run, so message is probably never null for a long time. This is probably like some horrible error case. But this case is not hit in this switch statement for as long as the game runs until the user actually presses reset. All right. So we start the graph thread, which is graph thread entry. We initialize the graphics. This only happens the first time, so I don't really care too much about that. Next overlay. Right. Okay, so every screen that we see, Ocarina of Time uses... I don't know if this is what the developers called it or what the people who converted the source code into C, who decompiled it, called it, but these are called overlays. So an example overlay, let me see, overlay init, next overlay is get next game state, which needs to return something. Ooh, game state overlay table. Okay, so we're about to find all the... Oh, that doesn't help. Game state table. Ah, we're back here. Okay, so these are all the overlays then. Game state setup, map select, console logo, play, title setup, and file select. So these are all the overlays in the game. Let's read the comment here. Game state table. Define game state should be used for game states with code loaded from an overlay. Argument 1. So setup, map select, console logo. Game state type name without the state suffix. Also used for init and destroy function names. Argument 2, which is the enum value, right? Game state ID enum name, yep. Argument 3, game state overlay spec segment name. I don't know what these are, and there's apparently no definition for them. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so those are the overlays. So we know what overlays are. This is the end of graphic thread execution. Yeah, okay. So this is the game loop. There are like technically 2 game loops because we're running on different threads. Threads meaning that there are multiple things happening concurrently. Okay. So on our main thread, we are just waiting forever until we see the reset message. On our graphics thread, we are running the game. So this is, I love this. I love that it looks so simple. I know that there is so much code buried here and even surrounding this logic, but there's a beautiful simplicity to seeing while the game is running, update the graph. And then everything that happens within the game is actually happening in there. It's really cool. This calls something from the game state, doesn't it? Update the graph. Problem is true. Tail magic. Head magic? Okay. There it is, game state update, which it got from this pointer. Okay, yeah. So that checks out. Very much checks out. So now, I again, my first mission was to see how main connects to the title screen, so I still want to see that. So we would go to graph thread entry. We would get the next state, right? Because OVL is null. Oh, I see. Game state setup is the first. Gotcha. Game state setup is the first one. So is there a setup? Setup is a suffix, right? There's map select. Let me search it. Oh, yeah, I think I just found it. Map select underscore init. So there must be a setup underscore init. Kaleido setup. Here it is, title setup. Right, let me just double check the other things here. Title setup init, in Z play. No, that's fine. Okay. Yeah, title setup underscore init is different from setup underscore init, right? Where's title setup init? Yes, that's opening. God, I hate the variables here. Like, the naming of these things is so confusing because setup is the setup for the console logo coming up. Title setup is the setup for really the title screen. Like, it's the title screen, but it's not the title screen. It is the opening, but this should be called opening setup init. Because look at the file name here, it's Z opening. So that like confusion there got me last time and it's getting me again. Hopefully it won't get me next time. All right, so let's pin you. You are a very important file. So title setup goes before Z opening. Graph.c, yes, you matter. Oh, right, yeah, I was mapping this stuff out. I'll continue this. Documentation goes first. Then we're at main. Global H is not as important. Ultra types, nope. Game.c, you kind of matter, but not yet. I don't need the preview right now. Graph definitely matters. Main is not going to matter so much anymore, so I'm going to unpin that. This definitely matters, right? So gameplay overlay table is an array that includes this file. So these make up the array. So this is index 0, index 1, index 2, index all that. What an interesting way to create an array. I've never seen that before. All right. So, setup. We can't go to a definition from here, which is kind of annoying. But we've seen that the next overlay is... where was that? This screen. I'm going to pin the game state table. That's a pretty important one. Interesting. Define game state internal is for a game state that's not an overlay. Interesting. Okay. So the overlay is the next overlay, and we know that the first overlay is the game state setup overlay. And it just knows, oh. Interesting. ROM file, OVL underscore hashtag name. I didn't actually see the definitions of these, or did I? Yeah, that looks pretty confusing. Type def enum game state table ID. That's fine. Yeah, what is the difference between this get next game state? Okay, this is an interesting thing compared to this one. These are two different areas where they define the same thing. Linker symbol declarations. Ah. Okay. Okay. I don't have a ton of experience with linkers. Ah, man, I wouldn't be able to... I have the framework in my mind, but if the words come to me, I'll explain it. Okay, so what's happening here... But what does it do? It doesn't type name. Ah, okay, take a look at this. Type name, ## underscore init, type name, ## underscore destroy. If we take a look at title setup, type name underscore init, type name underscore destroy. Maybe that's how they get linked up. That must be it. It's a little bit confusing that when I go to definition here, it's not, like, it doesn't take me to that other definition. Enum name. zlim table. Like, oh, interesting. This is like the models themselves. Okay, can't make full sense of that. Oh, and a skeleton. Oh, these must be the models, yeah. Okay. All right, so this right here, this zgame dlftbls.c is where this game state is defined in such a way that it links the type name with these functions, where the type name is the first one. Yes, okay, we're making sense of it. Okay, so here, when we enter in graph thread entry, we set the next overlay to game state setup. Oh, now you're... Oh, this was always here. Ah, that's... Okay. To game state setup, which calls this define game state internal from here, define game state internal from here, with this type name, which is... Come on. Setup. And then the second argument is the enum. Second argument is enum name. So type name gets used here to point us to setup underscore init and setup underscore destroy. It's finding it somehow, using whatever that linker logic is, but it's taking that type name and then explicitly finding in the code where that type name's init function exists and where that type name's destroy function exists and the size of that type name's state object. This is so fascinating. And this music is really fitting. All right. We're making good progress here. So we have now learned what? Well, we've learned that define game state internal and define game state are, here are the definitions. How do I put that in my documentation here? I think it's this, shows me the thing. Let's call this linker magic. And then let's preview it. Yeah, okay. Let's put some text in here, make it look fancy. Can I like emoji? Let's do that. Linker magic. Alright, so we go from main. I need to stop double clicking. Into graph thread entry. It's not exactly linker magic. Where is graph? We get it from the game state overlay table. So graph thread entry sets the default. Oh, you know what I need? I need a sequence diagram, not a whatever I have now. This needs to be a sequence diagram. Do I define it right now? Yeah, let's do that. Let's call this a win. I need mermaid docs now. This is the part where I slow down a lot in my main quest in order to make sure that my quest is documented. Let's keep the preview here. Let's go back. All right, so I need to define participants. There we go. So we have a participant. These participants are going to be files. Let's just delete you. Okay. These files, we'll keep that bigger. What was it? It was main.c, I believe. Yeah, main.c. Participant. What's this? Where does graph thread? Graph.c. And then graph.c sets in here. C game dlft bls.c. Which defines the game states. And then there's a linker. Okay. All right, so what happens? Main. Let's give these names. There it is. All right, so now I can use main instead of main.c to point to graph as graph.c. So main points to graph. What's the format? Is there an extra dash? Does it need text? Oh, it does need text. Okay. Let's get an arrow into that. And this is going to say start thread. Graph thread entry. Now, what the graph is going to do is it is... Where's graph? graph is going to set the next overlay. So from the graph, we point to, okay, zlib as that. Graph's going to point to zlib and say, say what? Just sets next overlay. Set next overlay to game state setup. Can I do that? No, I can't. Great. So I don't know how to check this here. So zlib points to the linker, says get me the setup objects, for lack of a better word, and the linker points back to zlib saying here's the setup objects. Now zlib points back to graph saying here's the setup overlay. We'll just say here's the game state setup overlay. Then later on, graph will decide to start the game. So later on, we have a graph update. So while game state is running, how do we start a loop? Loops, loop, text. Here's an example, loop every minute. I see. Okay, so further down, loop while game state is running. Does it end? Has to end it? Yeah. Then graph is going to point to graph saying, what is it, thread update? Out of the song end. Let's keep that going. Almost done here. Graph points to graph saying what? Graph update. Okay, with whatever the current game state is. Update the graph. Let's call it like a function. Is it graph update? Graph update with the game state. Now let's take a look at this. Nice. All right, so here's what we've learned. That main calls over to graph.c, calls graph thread entry. In graph thread entry, let's show the code while we're showing this. Where's main? Main.c. Okay, so here we are right now. Let me close these. Let's make this as big as possible. All right. Even bigger. Okay, so here's where we are. So in main.c, we have our main function. In main, we call this OS create thread. This OS create thread calls or uses graph thread entry. So that's what's happening here when main says start the thread called graph thread entry. The actual line where they start it is right here. passing this graph thread, which has been linked together to this graph thread entry. In graph thread entry, one of the first things that happens is on line 456 here, where we set the next overlay equal to the game state setup overlay. That comes from this overlay table. Now, that comes from this overlay table, which is a pretty confusing area. But well, you can see that it passes this setup thing here. Well, that setup thing is used here. It's the first parameter, so it's the type name. And if you notice, the type name is used with this underscore init and underscore destroy method. Make this bigger again. So we set the next gameplay state. Sorry, we set the next overlay to game state setup, which calls this setup game state internal logic here. Go back to the graph, gives the graph this next overlay. So when the graph main update logic begins, it says, I want game state setup. It gets the game state setup overlay. That becomes the first overlay, as you can see right here. It loads that game state, does a bunch of stuff, but eventually we get into this while the game state is running, update the graph, which is, here's the main game loop. So let me rename this to main game loop. Main game loop. Nice, we did it. Oh man, this code base is not the easiest thing to go through, but it's a lot of fun. It really does feel like going through a Legend of Zelda dungeon. Yeah, so I'm going to call it here. I think this is a good point to stop. I'm going to save this. If you want to take a look at this, I'm going to post a gist, a public gist. Let me just create one. Create a new gist, OOT. Let's just call it OOT docs. And let's call this main game loop. Main game loop .md. I'm going to take everything that was in here. Where's main game loop.md? There you are. Save you. And this should be publicly available. I don't know where it is. Okay, well, I'll find that and I'll make sure that it's in the description. For anybody else who's interested in looking into Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time's source code, maybe this will make it easier for the next person. Who knows? Yeah, so we will call it there. And I did not even drink much of my coffee in the meantime. So I'll hang out just a little bit. Man, this has actually been engaging, very engaging to me. This is a very weird way to experience nostalgia, is to truly look at, like, how does this thing work after becoming a programmer myself, and being able to judge in some cases, like some of the code. Not that I've seen anything like horrible, but looking at it and making sense of it is something truly special, especially while listening to the music and everything. Music that I've already listened to while working on my own stuff, working in work or my own projects. It's been a lot of fun. Also, just learning different ways that C works. Like, I wonder how that linker logic puts everything together, but man, I've definitely never seen this sort of syntax here. It's really interesting. But anyway, I'll call it here now. Spiced Vanilla Soul. It's a pretty good coffee. Get it from Bill's Coffee. I've got one nearby. Thankfully, they've got some very, very good coffee. So, that is it for me. I will catch you in the next one. See ya.